Hi there. Welcome to something new that I've been wanting to try. I've been wanting to do a sort of podcast for a while. I started getting the idea for this maybe around like November of 2020. And I was initially thinking about it because I had just been doing a lot of reflecting over my time doing YouTube and my time streaming. And it occurred to me that I think I hit my peak, I hit my stride when I just allow myself to start talking about things that I care about. I don't really focus on like the game I'm playing or whatever like certain topic I decided to like write a script over. Whenever I go unscripted and just start talking about things I care about, I think that's whenever I hit my peak. That's whenever I certainly am enjoying myself the most. And so I wanted to try doing this and seeing what it's like if I just start um, making an entire series potentially based on this premise. So I sat down and I made one of my goals at Christmas time to get some new equipment that would make a podcast that was higher quality. So one of the key things was a new microphone, which, assuming I end up uploading this to YouTube, I'm still not sure if I will, but assuming I do, then this should be the first thing that's uploaded with the new mic. So that's like the big thing. Um, so I got myself prepared over Christmas time for it, and we're finally here. I also made a graphic for the podcast. Not that it's a terribly high quality graphic, but it's there. And I came up with a name, the Dragon's Den podcast. I think the name's gonna stick. I really like it. The reason it's called the Dragon's Den podcast is because my name is Drake, and Drake means dragon, which also my YouTube name is supposed to be Mr. Drakenator. Of course, everyone misreads it as Draconator. It's to the point where most all of my close friends jokingly will call me Drac or Draconator or things like that because it's so common for people to misread it that way. But it's meant to be Draconator because my name is Drake, and that's where I got the idea for that podcast name. As far as what I'm going to discuss on the podcast, it can be anything. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is I feel like talking about, I don't want it to be things that are like super specific and like narrow minded. I want it to be more broader, interesting topics still that can appeal to a more general public, but it can be as serious or laid back as I want as far as the topics. Um, I am big into politics. Am I going to like get into like specific political stories too often? Probably not, but I don't know. Again, it can be pretty much anything as long as I think it can have a general appeal. Um, so we're just going to get started today with some topics, and I'll see how this goes, I guess. Um, and if I really enjoy doing it, then I'll start doing more of it. First topic I want to talk about this time around is social anxiety. So, I'm somebody that's been very fortunate in my life to really not struggle with social anxiety, which I was very lucky, really, in a way, because my dad has struggles with anxiety, and my sister does, and even my mom to some extent. But I never was really super anxious. I had little bits here and there. For the most part, I was really comfortable. That started to change, though. At this point, about a year ago, it started to change where like I used to be really good at presenting, like speaking publicly. It was my thing. It was even to the point where I thought it was my passion. But yeah, it was about January of 2020 where I started to have a steady decline in my public speaking ability. And I just started to become more and more nervous every time. And it really like hit its apex. And I think like October or November of 2020, whenever I had like a mental breakdown in the middle of giving a presentation. I was just giving a presentation in my English class, and I mean, I felt like I was choking. I couldn't get my words out, and normally I don't have to like look back at the screen to remind myself of what I put on the slides, but I was like reading directly off of them now, and I was like sweating like crazy, and it literally felt like time had stopped, and it felt like the screen was getting blurry. I mean, it was insane. So I had a breakdown to the point where I was like, I'm sorry, I can't continue. I had to walk out of the room. And so it's been a couple months since then, and I really haven't recovered from it. From that whole situation. I've just been like terrified, truly terrified of presenting ever since. Uh, and so the reason I kind of want that to be my first topic is because I feel like this podcast can help me. Because the root of my anxiety at this point is like, it's even gotten to the point where like just one-on-one conversation can make me nervous, because like I'm afraid I'm gonna like choke up in the same way, excuse me, that I did when I presented. Like I'm just terrified I'm gonna like lose track of my words, and everything's gonna fall apart like a Jenga tower. But I think podcasting like this, where I just talk, I just practice talking, confidently and comfortably. I really think that can help me, and even just right now, I feel like it's helping me. And so that's another inspiration for me for this podcast, is I want to combat social anxiety in a way, because like I talk to people about this, and a lot of them have said like there really isn't a magical cure for anxiety, and in a way I think that's wrong. I think there are cures out there. I mean, there isn't like something that's gonna perfectly instantly wash it all away, but there are so many things that can definitely help reduce it. But yeah, they're right to some extent that really the only way you can combat anxiety is to face what it is that's making you anxious, I would say. I don't think there's anything else that's really gonna make you heal the way that just facing whatever it was that hurt you initially would. So in the midst of this whole phase of social anxiety and just basically wanting to run away from the public eye, just wanting to basically fade off into the background almost, where I was last year, or 2019, I was like the forefront, like everybody was like excited for me to present, and these days it's like, man, I just want to sit down, I don't want to be up front ever. And so kind of in the midst of this newfound anxiety, I started to explore a new path, a new potential passion, since public speaking was no longer on the table. So I started writing a book, and that leads me to my next topic, which is the big emotional conflict that emerges when you complete like a big project. In my case, it was a book, of course. So it was only a few days ago. Wow, something just made a loud noise, I think. I'm sorry. It was only a couple days ago that I just finished my book entirely and published it through Amazon. I'm not going to say the name of it because, like, I don't want this to feel like it's some ploy to get you to go buy my book, so I'm just going to leave it out. But I finished my book and I published it on Amazon. And so there's always, like, I've done a few different big creative projects. Like, I wrote a movie script, and I wrote this book, or I guess I should say a screenplay if you're feeling fancy. So I've written both of those, and I've done like paintings that took me a while, or drawings that took me a while. And there's always this conflict that emerges emotionally when I finally hit that point where I'm done. The positive side of it is that I feel accomplished. Like, wow. Like, I just went over to my dad's house today, and I actually haven't received my copies yet because I ordered a bundle of them. So my dad got his physical copy of my book before I even got it. And so I held the book in my hand, and it's like, wow. It's a very surreal moment to hold, a book that I've been working on for about a year, finally in my hands with a cover and everything. It was a powerful moment, and it's a feeling that's really good. But then, I set the book back down, and I stare down at it, and the overarching thought becomes what's next. Uh, like, my entire life had become oriented around this story that I felt I needed to tell. And now that I had told that story, I kind of just stopped and thought to myself, well, now what do I do? And I mean, the general answer that I have for myself is that I should write more books. But who knows? I don't know. It's just that happens to me with everything. When I finished my movie script and I submitted it to a contest where they, read it and told me how it was, like, eventually the spark ended. Eventually the screenplay really didn't have any further to go. I was done with it. And it felt good, but I was just like, wow, like that's it. It's over. I guess it tends to not be nearly as fulfilling as one might expect. Whenever I was like writing it, I would like, when I was in the middle of writing it and I was still thinking of new ideas for it, I'd be in the shower and I would be thinking of new plot points and I'd be having these wicked fantasies of how crazy it would be when that book was finally published and how monumental it would be and how excited everyone would be. And to some extent, it was real. When it got published, a lot of people came to me and they were like, wow, that's awesome, man, congratulations. But it never felt as good as it did in my head. And I think that's something that affects artists in general. Like the completion of art is like both the most beautiful and the most painful thing that you can possibly experience, I believe, because of the confusion and the like, wow, that was it when you finally finish it. And so, if you haven't picked up on it already, I love writing, and I would say my biggest inspiration for writing, besides my dad, who is also an author, my biggest inspiration is Stephen King, because I like horror movies are my favorite genre, and I think the way Stephen King's stories are laid out, like a lot of his horror, is based on very real, like, trauma and fears that exist in the world, and I kind of want to write in the same way, where my stories are reminiscent of very real pain, even if the stories are very far fetched and outlandish. They're rooted in real pain. But Stephen King recently, well, not only recently, but I recently was watching a speech of his, giving some writing advice. I like to do that just to see what he thinks about different things. And he made a comment that I was quite surprised by. He said that lazy writers rely on the plot of their story, and he said that good writers will rely on characters and situations more. In a way, I think I am biased against this comment because I think whenever I was writing my book, the plot was like the big driving force for me. I thought, like, but if nothing else, like if this book is terribly written and everything else, the plot that I had, just the absolute base story I told was so interesting, I would save it. And I wasn't as much focused on the characters, but I mean, I still definitely put effort into the characters. I made them, more than two-dimensional. I made them have conflicts and emotions and times where they're evil and times where they're good. I didn't want them to be boring, but they were not necessarily the focus, and neither were the situations. But my problem with the situations part of that comment is that I think the situations are the plot, so I don't really think that's a very fair thing to say. If you're focused on the situations in your story, I mean, the situations are the plot, so in a way you're focused on the plot. So just in general, I think Stephen King is wrong when he says that. And again, this doesn't even have to be about writing books, right? Like, you don't have to be an author to kind of analyze this comment and think about it for yourself, because look at a movie, think about a movie that you love, and ask yourself, why do I love it? Now, obviously, there might be some external factors that his comment doesn't even encapsulate, because he is talking about books, but like maybe like you love the movie's soundtrack or something like that. But think about the movie and think about its plot, its characters, and its quote unquote situations. And like, what is it that makes you love it? Um, I would say a large part of what makes you love the movie is probably its plot. The characters probably certainly are a big part of it too, but I don't think it's wrong to love a movie for its plot. And I don't think it's wrong to love a book for its plot, or to write a book for its plot. I found that to be just a very almost startling comment. Like, it doesn't like change my perception of him or anything. It's just like, huh, Uh, it surprises me that he would say something like that, because I don't agree with him, but he's still awesome, still best author. I love him. It's just, I thought that was very interesting. Um, Last topic I want to cover for this is kind of more of a trial run to see how this goes. So I'm not like doing a huge amount of topics. Normally, choosing topics that I can talk about for hours on end. So the last one is childhood games. Now I've been kind of, I guess, in my time of boredom, as I'm still thinking about what to do now that my book is written and done, I've been spending a lot of time on YouTube watching playthroughs of old video games that I used to play as a kid. Like, we're talking like 6 years old, something like that. Very young. So we're looking at like SpongeBob SquarePants, Battle for Bikini Bottom, the original. Rehydrated is awesome, by the way. I love that game. But the original, I've been watching that. I've been watching Chicken Little, the game. That's great. We played a lot of licensed games whenever I was a kid. In the B movie game. And so I've been watching playthroughs of these games. And what I think is interesting is that as a kid, I was so like certain that these were masterpieces. And people will say that like, oh, kids love anything. So like, it's not really fair to say that you loved something as a kid because you loved anything. That's not true. That's not true. Kids don't like things. There are things that kids find boring. There are things that kids find uncomfortable. So this idea that kids will, love anything, or kids will eat anything, like these kinds of comments, they're stupid. No, they won't. Like, I don't know, it makes kids out to be like these monkeys that are just gonna accept whatever you throw at them. They're not. Kids do have standards. They just don't have them as well established as they will when they're older. So anyways, I loved these games. But what I think is so interesting is our perception of these games when like we look back on them just in our memories, like how we envision them in our head, and then we actually go back and look at them with like a new eye and an older eye, and how different they are. And usually one of the biggest components of this is the graphics. Like, if you think about a game from your childhood, you can almost remember it having like solid graphics, like not like PS4 graphics, like modern day graphics, but like you kind of think back on it, and you kind of think like, huh, like those were good graphics. Like that definitely was clear. Like everything had a lot of detail to it. You can envision a pretty decent looking game. Then you go back and look at it, and you're like, wow, this is absolute potato central. It's just like it's incredibly worse looking than you remember. And it's not like the games look terrible. None of them look terrible. They all actually look quite good by, whatever console it was. For me, it was PS2. They look pretty good for PS2. It's just they're not nearly as good as I remember them being. And I also have other memories of, like, the actual gameplay itself. Like, I tend to think of, like, certain levels in a game. Like, I spent, like, hours on. Like, as a kid, I would just play through the same levels in these games over and over. And I look back on them, and it's like, wow, this is way easier. And sometimes it's like, this is way more boring than I remember as a kid. A great example of this is the Robot Patrick boss fight in SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. Go and watch that boss fight, because it's awesome. I still love that boss fight. But as a kid, I would fight that boss over and over. I mean, we're talking dozens of times. I would sit down to play that game just to fight him. Turn on that PS2, load up the save file that was at that boss fight, and do it over and over, reloading that save file over and over. And I just loved it. My family got so tired of it. My sister, she would like watch me play, and then I would go to that boss fight, and she would just get so bored because I just kept fighting him. And so when I played Rehydrated back in like June, when it came out initially, I bought it like, well, no, I didn't buy it. My sister bought it, and then I leeched off of her like a welfare queen. I leeched off of her, and I played it. And I was so excited to fight this Robot Patrick. I was like, oh man, like he's graphically updated. He's gonna look great. The music to his fight is gonna be crisp. It's gonna be HD. I got to the boss fight. I did it, and my overarching feeling was just like, wow, that was nowhere even remotely as good as I remember it being. And this kind of feeling is tragic in a way, but it's also kind of beautiful because it makes me think about my childhood, and it makes me think like as a kid, it's not that I was entertained more easily, it's that I was able to see a beauty in them in these games that I wasn't gonna see when I was older. So like with the Robot Patrick boss fight, as a kid it was way harder to fight him than it is today. And so as a young kid, I got to really experience like a truly compelling, challenging experience with that boss fight that I would have never gotten if I first played it today. And like I'm grateful for that. Like not everybody can look back on Robot Patrick and think, man, that was like a challenging boss fight. They never got that feeling. And I'm sure they're depressed when they think about that. The fact that they never got to experience difficulty in SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, that must be a heartbreaker. I don't have to deal with that pain. I get to live knowing that I experienced that. And so that can apply to you and your childhood games. Because like most everybody probably has a childhood game that they played that I didn't play. And so I'll never get to have that same nostalgia and that same memory of like challenge and fun and addiction to that game that is impossible to have now that you're older. And so, I'm so grateful for those games and what they did for me at that time, even if they don't provide that same feeling now. Because they made me who I am in ways that I didn't even realize. Like an example of that, this isn't even another topic, I'm just doing exactly what a podcast is for, and for me, which is dragging on. Another childhood game for me that I loved was called Whiplash. Now, Whiplash, goddamn, so underrated. Go look into this game, Whiplash. PS2 game, and well, a few different platforms. I played on PS2. And so you play as this weasel. This weasel that's chained to a bunny. And like so you two run around together the entire game. And so it's basically a game where like you and this bunny manage to escape from this facility that does like really cruel tests on animals all day. That's like the whole foundation. And so as a kid I just loved it. I wasn't thinking about like anything. I wasn't thinking about the story or how genius the writing is. The writing in the game is so funny and so smart. But I wasn't thinking about that as a kid. I was just like, mechanics fun, But realistically, right, the game had a huge message, a very serious message in a way, about animal cruelty. And I think that message resonated with me even as a kid in a way that I didn't even realize because growing up, I am now, super against animal cruelty. I mean, like, I love donating to things that are all about, like, improving conditions for animals and stuff like that. And I can't really pinpoint an exact phase where I was just like, yes, let's let's help animals. Let's combat animal cruelty. And so part of me wants to think that the game Whiplash, its story and its message against animal cruelty, you know, impacted me in a subconscious way that still lingers with me today and makes me, I'm not like a huge animal rights advocate or anything, but like I do still stand up for that. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think uh, art, even whenever we experience it as a kid, and we don't consciously take in its message, still affects us subconsciously, and we won't realize it until later. And I think that's beautiful. Uh, I think growing up from childhood and realizing the lessons you learned during your childhood is more beautiful than childhood itself. So, there you have it. That's my rambling session disguised as a podcast. Uh, if I end up uploading it to YouTube, I guess let me know what you think. Like, was that entertaining at all? Did you actually want to listen to that, or was it miserable? Please let me know, because I don't know. I had a lot of fun just talking about stuff. I loved that. So you let me know what you thought, and maybe I'll do more. That was so fun. Alright. I'll see y'all later. That was beautiful.